Welcome to Long Thoughts with Baloo, a podcast dedicated to creators and their stories. Your host, Baloo, asks creative folks to share their lives and goals. Stay a while and listen.
Scott Woods is a librarian, writer, poet, and critic that runs one of the most successful poetry open mics in the Midwest. You can buy his book, We Over Here Now, in all major online retailers. In 2006, he became the first poet to ever complete a 24 solo successant reading, a feat he has repeated annually 7 times without using the same poem. Here he is, Scott Woods. How are we doing, Scott?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am wonderful.
Awesome.
I got to talk to you on the phone. That's pretty cool.
Oh, shucks.
So what are you doing these days?
Well, when I'm not working at the whole library thing, I'm still running my weekly show. Been doing that for 18 years, every Wednesday.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm, trying to fit in writing where I can. Of course, I'm working on a couple of books, hopefully that will come out this year. Not poetry, for once. And I'm in the midst, my biggest thing right now is a series that I'm running all the month of March, 30 consecutive shows throughout the whole month, a different show each night, a different artist each night, called Holler. So that has taken up all of the free time that I have.
That sounds pretty occupying, but it sounds really fun. I'd love to hear some of it. Is it audio? Is it paper? What is it?
You talking about the event?
Yes, the book part.
Oh, the book part. So the 2 books that I'm in the process of working on, one is a book of essays. So some of that is my online writings, plus some new stuff, but all essays. And then the other book is a novel. So I've actually been working on that, I'm sad to say, for a couple of years now. But I've learned a lot through that process. It's not the first novel I've written, but it's the best novel I've written. So,
yay, progress.
Yeah.
So I forgot to mention in the cue card that you were the president of Poetry Slam Inc. for a while. How was that? Tell us something about that.
Well, that was a learning experience. For the most part, I loved the job. I came into Slam officially in 2001, so 16 years ago. And when I came in, no one knew who I was, no one cared. My city wasn't even on the map, and so to me, I thought it was going to be I thought the community was going to be one way and the competition was going to be one way. And it really wasn't like that at all, And so I immediately began immersing myself in the back end of things, trying to work on that experience for other people who might encounter Slam and not get turned away, from any manner of things. So I spent about almost a decade, in some capacity doing that for PSI and for the Slam community.
That sounds like you tried to. I know are we talking broadening the show to other people's horizons? Maybe homogenizing the show a little bit to take off the edges? I'm not sure I follow.
Sure. So when I came into Slam, it was still pretty wild. Things were still, the work that was showing up in Slam, the poems themselves, were pretty varied. There was a lot of surprises, a lot of originality, just things I had never seen before, things I would have never conceived you could do with the poem. And then over time, that changed, of course. One would argue that things always change, and I wouldn't argue that, but I would say that, there were things that I think were put into place in that community, in that infrastructure, that made those changes not be what they should have been. So, for instance, for my money, Slam competitions at least at that level are fairly poet-centric. The organization of it all is fairly poet-centric. It concerns itself with what slammers want more than what audiences want and with what host cities might need. And so when you put poets first, you have to do certain things. You have to inundate the process with rules. You have to, cater to the things that they think are going to make their work shine. And it's like, well, none of this is really about you. I know it says poetry slam, but it's not really about you. And so, I and a number of others during the time that I was there, nobody does it by themselves, of course. We spent no small amount of energy trying to balance that poet-centric aspect of the community with, an organization that needed to build itself, that needed to sustain itself. That was also very difficult. And somewhere in there, do good work.
It sounds like you were trying to balance like the people and the property at the same time.
In some respects, it's interesting. Like, to me, it was always fascinating to kind of step in, as the president, let's say, when I was the president, to step in as the president and say, look, we can take this thing in any direction y'all want to take it, but you need people to follow you there. It can't just be a bunch of poets who want to just hang out at the pool and do ciphers in the middle of the night. I mean, that's cool, but that's, I'm not going to drag my team to that across the country, spend $2,000-$3,000 to drag a team across the country for that. I'm not going to do that. We party just fine where I live.
That's fine. Like if I just wanted the party, I could do that here. Yeah.
Pretty much.
So you mentioned earlier that there was different poetry and different things you'd heard that were unique at the time. I have never heard a poet ever, other than you, use Bob Ross. Ever at all? Where did that come from? Does he inspire you? Did you know him? How does Bob Ross bleed into two different poems of yours? One's like a sequel to the other. They're wonderful.
Yeah, well, thank you. No, I love Bob Ross. I've always loved Bob Ross. Anybody that tells you that they don't love Bob Ross has just never encountered Bob Ross. He's amazing. I mean, forget that he's a painter and he has abilities with paint. I mean, the whole image that he portrays as this kind of laid-back everyman, but very warm and very sensitive and very, and you can do it, this cheerleader. To me, that just always appealed to me, as a personality type, I guess. And the fact that he could paint just made it even better because I spent years trying to paint and I was never extremely good at it, but I probably got a couple of tips on how to paint a tree from him. But Bob is awesome. Bob is an icon. Bob is
a white man with an afro who pulls it off.
I mean, the afro is. I mean, that's a pretty big sell right there for me. Personally. But yeah, so and I do know of one other poet who's done some Bob Ross poetry, Bill Campana out of Arizona. He's got a couple of those floating around. He's a good friend of mine, and we have bonded over Bob Ross over the years.
That sounds wonderful. I'd love to hear some. You have a contact from him, and I'll reach out and see if we can get him on the show so I can hear some of that. I bet it's wonderful.
He would love it.
Wonderful. I wanted to ask you, in the cue card, I mentioned that you've performed for 24 hours straight numerous times. There are lots of really good poets out there. I've never heard of anybody doing that other than you. What on earth possessed you to read poetry for 24 hours? You got to be exhausted by the end of that.
You don't have to wait till the end. You're exhausted about 6 hours in, No, for me, I was just largely concerned with what could you do with poetry, that people were not doing or had never done. I'm a little bit of kind of like Evel Knievel when it comes to that. I'm into performance art. I'm into the challenge of it, but I like doing it in ways that actually remain compelling to average people. And so I was like, well, I did some research, and I couldn't really find anybody who had done like 24 hours of poetry. There's no technical Guinness record for that, for poetry specifically.
Right.
Nor are they interested, as I've learned. and so I said, you know what? I just think that there's something in there. There's something in that process. You know, I'm a self-made poet. You know, I didn't go to college for poetry or anything like that. Never finished college regardless. And so, you know, everything that I know about poetry, I've had to acquire. You know, and half of it I had to experience in one way, shape, or form. And so the 24-hour thing, to me, I was thinking, well, this is going to be the best workshop ever. You know, I'm gonna read all these poems. I'm gonna find other people's poems and read those poems, and I'm gonna do that for 24 hours. I mean, what could you not learn from that? You know, and as it turns out, I learned a lot. Like, I'm still learning from having done those.
Do you still do that?
Last year, I called it quits after that. I'd done it 8 times in 10 years, and you know, any point that I had to prove, I proved a long time ago. But you know, mostly I find that I'm chasing those lessons in different ways now, ways that do not hurt me physically. You know, and two, like, you know, it's cool to be the guy who did that. At the same time, you don't want to be known as the guy who did that. You know, it's like, that's the thing that you're known for. And I'm like, well, I mean, that's cool, don't get me wrong, but
I do other stuff.
Yeah.
I recorded with another poet yesterday, Big Papa E, and we were talking about his work and Taylor Molly's work, and specifically What Teachers Make and Wussy Boy Manifesto. And he mentioned that, he goes, that's probably, you know, if when I die, they're probably going to carve, for better or worse, a wussy boy on my tombstone. And he goes, I write lots of other stuff that's good, but that's what everybody remembers me for.
Yeah. I mean, he could have worse things carved on his tombstone.
Yeah, I suppose you could. Wussy boy is up there, though, or down there, as the case may be. Like, I don't want to go to my grave being called a wuss, and not that those words make him a wuss. The whole point of the poem is greater than that. But for, you know, casual passerby of the graveyard folk, they might be like, nobody liked him, you know. And I love Big Papa. He's a great guy. But I don't know. I'm not sure I'd want Wussy Boy on my tombstone. Bob Ross might be a better thing to write.
100 times over.
Like, who doesn't want to be Bob, right? I wanted to ask you, you have several chapbooks from the past. I think one is on my shelf in the other room. And in it, there are 3 Prince playlists and at least 3 different poems aside from them that make reference to Prince. You seem to have like this love-hate relationship with him.
Oh, no, it's all love.
Oh, excellent.
It's complete love, and that was before he died.
So
I owe Prince.
Do you?
Like, I have things in my DNA that belong to Prince as an artist and probably as a person too, clearly. But no, I mean, that the Prince thing that's all real, and I'm not above writing a Prince poem now. You know. Excellent.
It's
good to know. One of the longest poems I ever wrote is a Prince poem.
Really? What's it called?
What is it? Everything You Need to Know About Prince in 13 Songs, I think, is the whole title.
Oh, jeez. When you said it's really long, how long are we talking? 3 minutes? 10 minutes?
Oh, I have no idea what it is timed. It's pages, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, that's probably pretty long.
Yeah. I performed it in total, like, I performed it a few times, maybe like 3 times, the entire thing.
I haven't actually had any poets on the show who had explained what the rules for slam are to anybody who doesn't know. But since you were the president of PSI, could you run us through the general rule set for slam so everybody knows?
Sure. So, traditionally speaking, a slam is a mock competition in which poets compete usually for 3 minutes or less. They have 3 minutes. Most poets read up to 3 minutes. And then they get scored by 5 more or less randomly chosen judges out of the audience in that particular show. And they're scored on a scale of 0 to 10. You drop the high score, you drop the low score, you add the 3 scores in the middle, and that's the poet's actual score. Poets can't use props, costumes, or musical accompaniment. It's just them and whatever's on the stage. And that's pretty much a slam.
And are we talking 3 contestants, 20 contestants, however many contestants show up? How does that work?
I mean, depending on wherever you are, at the local level, that could be any number of poets from 2 to, 12, 15, whatever.
Right.
It may be at multiple rounds. At the regional and national level, those things are fairly standardized. So they're either team competitions or indie competitions. If they're team competitions, they're usually in sets of 3 or 4 teams per bout.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're individual, you're probably going to end up doing somewhere between 2 to 4 poems to qualify for a final. So yeah.
Have you been on a team before? I've heard you read a couple of works that was just you. Have you done team work?
Numerous times, yeah. I was on the first team out of Columbus, Ohio, and I was on most of the teams that my reading sent to national and regional competitions. And I'm not above slamming now. So, although I don't do it competitively so much anymore, like I don't go to PSI events anymore, but I still love slam as a tool and for what it is and what it can teach you. Mm-hmm. But no, I've been on lots of teams. I've coached lots of teams. One of my teams went to semifinals back in like 2004, and yeah. So yeah.
How do you coach poetry? I never even considered that till this moment right now. How would you coach somebody?
Well, that varies. There are probably as many ways to coach poets as there are poets, because everybody thinks they know what the heck they're talking about. But my philosophy is, well, for the most part, my philosophy has changed a little bit depending on the makeup of the team that I was working with. Some teams need more coaching than others. Sometimes you get an errant poet that you weren't counting on, so now you have to kind of work around that, navigate that person's abilities. But for the most part, the philosophies that I bring to coaching a team, or that I did anyway, it's been a couple of years since I've had to coach a team, but my philosophy starts with the poems. It's all about the poems. I don't care how well you perform. If I don't like your poem, it doesn't matter. You're not going to get what you want from me, as an audience member or as a coach, if I can't get on board with your poetry. So I spend no small amount of time right out the gate on the writing, regardless of what they already have in pocket. Usually when you put a team together, you have some time, months, to get ready for a competition. A few months, or maybe a little more, depending on how you run your show. And so I spend at least the first month, or maybe even 2, writing. You're going to be doing lots of writing. And then at that point, we'll narrow down your work based on what we're seeing. But my goal is to keep you, it's like we're going to the gym. I like to tear up your muscle, then I let it heal over and grow bigger.
Right,
so
and then we rip it again.
Yeah. You're gonna write lots of poems, and then hopefully we'll rip them up a little bit, and then you'll be stronger for the experience. And then we can talk about which ones you can perform well. Usually, a poet who can perform has those chops. They're either able to work on those chops and get them really well done, or they're a natural. And I've had the fortunate ability to work with a lot of naturals. And so really our issue wasn't, can you perform this well enough to compete? It was, is this poem good enough to compete? If they can perform the phone book, then we don't need to worry about that so much. I certainly don't need to worry about that on day one. So
that's a really good analogy. Really good analogy. If you can perform the phone book, if you can make the phone book engaging, it's not the performance that needs work. That's really good. I've never thought of it like that.
And I've seen a couple of cats do it.
Really? That's awesome. Yeah. Do you have any work that you could read on the show?
Oh, I'm sure I have something laying around. Yeah.
That would be wonderful.
Let me pull a book out.
Just so everybody listening knows, I would have had you read Scott read the Bob Ross poem, but he can't find it.
Yeah. My chapbook collection is buried somewhere right now.
It's no problem at all.
Okay, how about I read you something from the most recent book? This came out about this time last year, actually.
So it's pretty new. Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so let's do something that, at least for me, is relatively short. This poem is entitled Phylum. A group of poets is a salon. A group of assholes is a pinch. A group of rioters is a looting. A group of football fans is a celebration. A handful of chokeholds is a clutch. A group of terrorists is a cell. A group of suicide bombers is a war. A group of American terrorists is a militia. A group of black people is a gang. A group of black teachers is a gang. A group of black software engineers is a gang. A group of architects is a draft. A group of black architects is a gang. A group of black American suicide bomber terrorists is a fantasy. A group of thugs is a syndicate. A group of black thugs is Sing Sing, is Rikers, is D-Block. A group of prisons is an industry. A group of groups is a people. A group of lovers is an orgy. A group of haters is a Monday. A group of gropers is a frat party. A group of assholes is also a kegger. A group of keggers is a football riot. A group of black rioters is a riot. A group of riots is a movement. A group of movements is a society. A group of societies is a world. A group of worlds is space. A group of spaces is blackness.
That was really good. Thank you for sharing that with us. I don't know why I sound surprised. Of course it was going to be really good. It was you.
But... Oh, you never know. You never know.
Have you read that before? Have you read that at a competition or anything?
Not at a competition. I will let that out at a featured reading right now anyway. Stuff rotates in and out of my hands, so to speak, when I'm doing gigs. So yeah, that one I still do at gigs right now, yeah.
Wonderful. I'm glad to be part of the Scott in the moment.
There you go.
Thank you. In the poem, you brought up black more than a couple of times. And I had a question that I wanted to ask you. On Facebook, I'll put a link for your Facebook on the channel so everybody can can scope out your stuff. You are outspoken, let's put it, about your section of the race. Does that color... I'm sorry, that was a poor choice of words. Does that change...
No,
does that affect your life lens, how you see things? How, your political viewpoint, your relationship, that kind of thing?
No, that is the basis for how I see things. That is not negotiable. It's in my work. It's in my life. It is what I am, and I am that thing unapologetically.
Does it ever... I say it like it's a separate entity, and that's not fair. Does you being you ever cause you a hard time?
I mean, only in so much as I live in a place that has a hard time with it. Me walking around in my spaces where where my culture is and where I am comfortable, there is no issue,
Wonderful.
I'm just being Scott. It's only when I'm not in those spaces that I'm something else first, and then Scott. That's not my problem. That's their problem.
Absolutely. I was delicate about bringing it up. I didn't want to... For everybody knows, I shot that by Scott before the show started, because I didn't want to just drop it on him and be like, hey, how is it to be... Yeah, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, no.
I am very, very white. I'm not just white, I'm pale white. I'm like a sheet of paper that you bleached. I don't even know if that's a thing. So, and in the population I live in, there are very, very few people who don't look like me. There's not a lot of extra culture or color or whatever you want to call it around. My mother moved here years and years ago and is still waiting for the people with the real food and the dreadlocks to get here. That's what she calls it. It was years before things like Charisse showed up. And it's nice to know that there is a place where people who don't look like me get along just fine, and that's really cool. If you could share one piece of advice for writers, I know that's you've probably heard that like a million times, but I'd like to think
Well,
there's an ever growing, there's always another guy who needs to know that it's okay to write and to go, hey, look at what I do.
yeah, the best piece of advice that I can give any writer at any given moment, regardless of what they're writing, is to execute. If you do not actually write, if you do not create, it does not matter what your idea is, what your philosophy is. No one cares how good your idea is, past, a couple of seconds of you announcing it. No one cares. At the end of the day, you have to execute. If you do not create, you are not a writer. End of discussion.
There you have it. Scott Woods on what it takes to be a writer. So I asked you what you're doing these days and what you've done. We went over a little bit what you've done in the past. What are your plans going forward?
Well, once I get past this big event in March, I will calm down. I'll get real quiet for a while. I'll be focused on those books, getting those done and out the door.
Wonderful. That sounds like it's going to be, I don't know if it's intensive, but it sounds like it is work, but it's a labor of love. That sounds like something I'd love to hear about.
Oh, I mean, it's writing, right? So you're either doing that or you aren't. And so to me, it's not intense. It's just what I am. It's what I'm supposed to be doing. And so, I mean, you could argue, I don't know if people walk around saying, my life is intense. I think they just live their life, and it either is intense compared to somebody else or it isn't compared to somebody else. But I think most people's lives are just their lives, and I think lives are a lot like jobs. Everybody more or less has one, and so everybody more or less kind of walks through it the same way they walk through anything else. So for me, being a writer is that's just what I am. That's as much a part of me as anything else. So, if I'm not doing that, then I'm not being myself.
I never heard it put like that. That makes a lot of sense. Like writing is like breathing. You just do it. Yeah.
I do. I know a lot of other people have it. It takes up a different place in their lives, and that's cool. A lot of other people are just kind of dabbling with it, and that's fine. Some people can turn that on and off. That's great. For me, if I'm not writing, it just means I'm procrastinating. I know I'm supposed to always be doing it.
If you're not writing, it doesn't mean you're doing something else. That's what you're doing. You're not writing. Right.
Pretty much. I mean, my life wasn't always like that, but that's definitely what it's become.
And you're happy with that?
When I'm writing, yeah.
Excellent.
When I'm not, I get surly,
For me, I write poetry less than I used to, but I do. Right now, I'm kind of doing this. Right now, I'm trying to create a podcast, and that takes up way more of my time than I thought it was going to. But it's so wonderful.
Been there.
Yeah, it sounds like it. But I used to, and I do write a little bit still. I guess what I do is I turn it on and off. Like one minute I'm like, I'm going to write, and I never get up and be like, I'm going to write a poem today. That's never what happens. But I'll go whole weeks without writing anything. And when I was a kid, when I was younger, anywhere between like 11 and 17, write two, three things a week. And it was like a machine. Vid it, and there was more. And a lot of them are just teen garbage. Teen angsty nonsense. But I think that's what happens. I think that was a great way to put it. I turn it on and off. And I don't mean to. It just kind of turns itself on and off and goes, today you're a poet, tomorrow you might not be.
Yeah.
So we're about wrapped up with the half hour, but thank you so much for being on the show.
No, thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. If I could get you to... do you have a favorite Prince song or a favorite Prince thing? Like an experience you could tell us about to leave on a funny, fun note.
Well, I mean, I went to Paisley Park this past fall, I took a tour of that, which was pretty amazing, with almost no qualifiers there. It was pretty fascinating. It was funny. I actually went there twice. The first time I went was like in the summer, and of course they weren't giving tours and no one was allowed in or anything. And so I was just outside the gate like with 50 other people, because apparently that's just what people do. And just looking at the building, just like, Prince was in there. And at that point I hadn't written like kind of, everything that I had to say about him. He had been dead, of course, at that point for, a few months, but, I hadn't really got to the heart of it all. But I had determined what my relationship with him was like. And the best way that I could define it was like a friend that I never really talked to that much. And so, in the summer, again, I was outside Paisley Park looking through the gate, and I'm like, man, this sucks. My friend died, da-da-da-da. And then I had an opportunity later in a year in October to actually go. The week that they opened tours, jumped on that, went with a friend, and we took the tour, and it was, and I was inside, and it's like, this is the place I've been trying to get into for like 30 years, or whatever, 20 years or whatever, to see where all of these amazing things happened, to breathe that air, to be in that space, and it was very overwhelming. I had to kind of like nitpick things so that I could emotionally survive the experience. I'm like, well, they probably could have fixed that carpet there, or little stuff like that. But just to keep from like bursting into tears or something. So yeah, but that was a profound experience for me, and I like reflecting on it. I learned a lot just kind of walking around in that space, and I was definitely inspired.
I bet. Thanks for sharing that with us.
You've been listening to Long Thoughts with Baloo. Do you create? Know someone who does? Have ideas or feedback? Contact Baloo at radiobaloo@gmail.com. That's RADIOBALOO at gmail.com.